West Basin Welcome to the West Basin Municipal Water District Water Policy and Legislation Committee and special meeting of the Board of Directors for March 18th. It's now 1 o'clock. I'll call this committee meeting to order. Do we have a quorum, Mr. General Manager?
Madam Chair, I will read through our roll call. Director Don Deere.
Here.
Chairwoman Gloria Gray.
Here.
Director Scott Houston. Director Harold Williams.
Here.
Director Desi Alvarez. Madam Chair, we have a quorum.
Thank you very much. So to item 3, public comment. Do we have anyone from the public who wish to comment?
Madam Chair, we have not received any requests for public comment, though this meeting is being held both in person and virtually. If there are any members of the public that would like to make public comment, now would be the time to do so. Please indicate so by raising your virtual hand. And Madam Chair, I do not see any requests for public comment.
Okay, thank you. Item 4, presentation. There are no presentations. We will go to item 5, action calendar. Mr. General Manager, would you please introduce this item?
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Chair. This item 5A is an adopt a support position on priority for Water Supply and Conservation Act, HR 7065. And for this presentation, we do have Matt Vey, our Manager of Water Policy and Resources Development.
Thank you, EJ, and good afternoon, Chairwoman Gray and directors. I am currently on packet page 3 of the agenda. So in late January, Representative Grace Napolitano introduced HR 7065, which is new legislation known as the Priority for Water Supply and Conservation Act. This legislation is aimed at elevating the status of water supply and water conservation to be primary mission areas of the United States Army Corps of Engineers. Staff is recommending this committee to consider moving the bill to the Board of Directors with a support recommendation. As you are well aware, West Basin and the Army Corps have worked closely together for many years on the district's Harbor South Bay Recycled Water Project, with the Army Corps helping to fund and to construct more than a dozen recycled water laterals to expand the availability of recycled water supplies throughout the region. West Basin originally had a $35 million federal funding authorization through the Water Resources Development Act of 1992. And over the next couple of decades, it collaborated with the Army Corps to build out its recycled water infrastructure. That funding was exhausted a little more than 5 years ago, which is when West Basin sought additional funding and successfully advocated for an additional $35 million authorization in 2018. Bringing the district's total funding authorization to $70 million through the Army Corps. As of this year, none of the additional funding has been expended yet, although the district is currently has an appropriation of about $4.8 million to construct 2 new recycled water laterals in the cities of Carson and Gardena. West Basin expects to partner with the Army Corps for many years to come, which would make this legislation valuable to the continued efforts to ensure that West Basin's water supply projects are given equal standing to the Army Corps' other priority areas moving forward. And the other priority mission areas of the Army Corps include navigation, flood control, and ecosystem environmental restoration. So according to Representative Napolitano, who has long fought for water supply reliability, and especially for recycled water supplies, as you know, a changing climate and the evolving needs of our communities requires new ideas as it pertains to the historic priorities of the Army Corps. And while the Corps has invested in water supply projects for many years, it has not included those types of projects as a primary objective like the ones I just mentioned. So this legislation would change that by raising the profiles of water supply and conservation as increasingly important national priorities, and it would authorize the Army Corps to give equal priority to water resources development measures for those types of sustainable sources of water supply. Among several new activities that would be part of the Army Corps' mission would be measures to promote water conservation and water reuse practices at existing projects to maximize the utilization of existing water supplies, as well as investigating opportunities to increase or add water supply storage at existing Army Corps water resources development projects. Whether this applies to the continued expansion of recycled water infrastructure or investing in new projects that capture and store recycled water for groundwater augmentation, West Basin is very likely to benefit from a new overarching policy with this focus. Now, as you know, Congress is pretty split at this time, and being an election year, it's uncertain whether a bill like this has a chance of gaining traction in one or both of the houses. However, it does seem to be a proposal that would potentially benefit West Basin and our communities in the future with no perceived downside at this time. I did include a copy of the bill text as well as a fact sheet that the author's office put out of what it proposes to do. This can be found on pages 7 to 10 of the packet. And in summary, staff believes this legislation is worthy of a support position, and we therefore recommend the committee consider moving it to the full board with a support recommendation. We will be meeting with Representative Napolitano for a final time in Washington, D.C. next month. And it would be nice to express our support for this bill and also for her many years of dedicated service helping to advance reliable water supplies in California and the West. That said, that concludes my report, and I welcome any of your questions or comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Are there any questions?
I'd like to move that we, I'd like to move that we pass this bill on.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Matt. I don't know if this is appropriate time to kind of mention that, but Congresswoman Napolitano has been very supportive throughout my career and probably West Basin's career in terms of recycled water. Is there anything special we could do for her? I know she's terming out or retiring. Is there any facility or any place or whatever we could name something after her, a room or something? It's a thought.
Yeah,
Go on.
Chairwoman Gray, that's certainly something that I know EJ has brought up to me in the past, and I think we can kind of look at some options for additional recognition. We are providing her with our Legislator of the Year award this year. But if there's something additional that we wanted to do to recognize all her service, I think that's something that we can come up with a few ideas and maybe share them with the board for future, I guess, agreement or adoption.
Yeah, I know there's a room there at the NC Little Platte, and maybe we could name a room after her there or someplace. But anyway, Director Deere, did you want to comment on it, or you had any thoughts about it?
No, I think Harold had something.
Director Williams?
Oh, yeah, I had a question whether or not I could get a copy of the, hard copy of the report.
Oh, yeah.
So,
Oh, the
But I-
okay.
yeah, but I would support any
Yeah,
efforts to honor Napolitano with something that can be viewed perhaps at one of the sites that we're going to be building our either Gardena or Carson.
Okay. Well, I think you heard input from at least a couple of the board members, Mr. General Manager. So I'd like you to come back with some recommendations for the committee to consider and then options to present to the board, please.
Will do.
All right. Okay, thank you, Matt. Anything else on that item?
No, ma'am.
All right, then we'll go to item 6, information calendars, state and federal legislative update for February 2024, please.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Chair. Again, for this presentation, we have Matt Bay, Manager of Water Policy and Resources Development.
Thank you, EJ. I'm now on page 11 of the agenda packet.
Excuse me, did we vote on that last motion?
Technically, it's not a motion, but what we
You're
heard
right.
was a recommendation to move the item to the full board.
Adopt a support position is what it says on our agenda.
Correct.
That's what I move that we do so.
Okay.
Yeah, we don't vote, we just, the two would recommend your.
For the record,
recommendation.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Go on.
Thank
To the
you.
full board.
All
Right, so the monthly state legislative report that Nemella Pappas and Associates develops begins on page 13. And I want to start by recapping our annual Sacramento advocacy trip, which took place on March 5th. We met with 8 legislative offices, handed out Legislator of the Year awards to both Senator Ben Allen and Senator Ana Caballero. And overall, we had a very productive and successful trip. President Alvarez and Director Houston both did a great job of providing updates and conveying our priority issues to our legislative representatives. And we're hoping to have a couple of the representatives that we weren't able to meet with in Sacramento to come out to our Edward C. Little facility at some point this year so that we can meet with them and update them on our programs. Another update comes from the primary election, which also occurred on March 5th. While some
Matt,
race results are.
Matt, can I interrupt?
Yes.
Can I interrupt you for a moment? What 8 legislators did you meet with? Did you say that?
I did not.
Can you tell us?
Yeah, I did
that,
not.
Please.
Sure. So we met with Senator Ben Allen. We met with Senator Ana Caballero. We met with Assemblyman Ted Lieu. Met with Assembly Member Jackie Irwin. And then we met with representatives from the offices of Assembly Member Brian, Senator Bradford's office, with Assembly Member Mike Gibson's office, and I believe there was one more. Struggling to think of who it is off the top of my head.
No.
That was Assembly Member Jackie Irwin. Yeah.
The only correction was, we did meet with, Assembly Member Al Marisucci.
Yes, sorry about that. Elmer's correct. Yeah, I think there was one more, but yeah, I'd be happy to give you the full list of meetings after this. I'll have Desiree send that out to the directors. Okay. So while some race results from the primary election are still being finalized, and we won't have final certification until April 12th, we have a pretty good idea of how many races and ballot measures turned out. Staff shared some preliminary results with the directors last week, but the plan will be to provide the final results in April. We do know that Representative Adam Schiff and Steve Garvey are headed to a runoff in November for the open U.S. Senate seat. And unless something changes, Representative Schiff will be the heavy favorite going into the general election. Proposition 1, which is the proposed $6.4 billion mental health bond, was passing by a very slim margin as of Friday, I think by about 20,000 votes. The opponents have conceded, but Governor Newsom has not yet claimed victory. It looks likely to pass, but it won't be certified until next month. And I will say that the outcome of that bond will very likely impact what bonds go onto the November ballot. There's a certain amount of kind of capacity for bonds this year. We've heard anywhere from $15 to $20 billion. So if this mental health bond goes through, it could impact the climate bond that we would have potentially programs in. So just something to keep an eye on. And then in state races in our service area, in Senate District 35, Laura Richardson has a slight lead over Michelle Chambers. So this is a race that will go to a fall runoff to assume the outgoing seat of Senator Stephen Bradford. And in Congressional District 30, currently held by Representative Adam Schiff, Assemblymember Laura Friedman beat out a crowded field, including Assemblymember Anthony Portantino and former lawmaker Mike Fuhrer, as well as West Hollywood Mayor Seppi Shine. And this will also go into a fall runoff with Republican Alex Malekian. More information about the various races and results of the primary election is included in the NPA report. Moving on to other updates, we're now firmly in the midst of the legislative session with all bills now being introduced and starting to work their way through the committee. Yes. Yes.
Before you go on, I'd like to ask you some questions about the election, the results.
Sure.
You get today. The only runoff in our district is Laurie Richardson and Michelle Chamber. Is that the only runoff? And you mentioned another one? Which is the other one?
The other one was in Congressional District 30. That was the seat held by, or that is held by Adam Schiff. That one will be,
Oh, yeah. Right.
yeah, between Laura Friedman and then a Republican who's not a current
Yeah.
elected official,
And-
Alice Vallecki.
In a primary, it's not the highest vote getter from each party. It's just the highest vote getter. Is that the way it works?
That's correct. It's a top two primary system. So unless somebody has over 50%, if they have over 50%, then they win. And there doesn't need to be a runoff. But if it's below 50%, then the top two vote getters, regardless of party, will then go to the fall runoff.
Yeah, and the percentages difference between Laurie Richardson and Michelle Chambers is what, 5%?
It's about 3.5%, I think, 3.5%, 4%. So pretty close right now. Yeah, could definitely go either way. I think they were, I want to say Richardson was about 27.5%, 28%, and Michelle Chambers was about 23.5%. So there's a lot of, other votes out there that could go either way in the fall.
Okay, because there were a lot of votes off. Okay, any questions, Director Deere or Director Williams regarding the results, the primary results?
No, thank you.
Yeah, I have a question, not regarding the vote, but concerning Lou. What is his position?
Ted Lieu's a member of Congress.
Congress,
So
that's what I thought.
We'll be visiting with him when we go.
Okay, thank you. Because I thought I heard assembly.
Yeah, that was my mistake.
Okay,
Yeah, sorry about that.
thank you.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Attention.
Matt, you can,
I was awake.
Thank you.
You believe that?
Okay, thank you, Chairwoman Gray. So this is the time of year when gut and amend bills happen. So spot bills are introduced and then they take them and actually form them into what they want them to be. So we'll start to have a full picture of legislation in the next month or so. The budget continues to look ominous as we head toward the governor's May revise in a couple of months. The initial $38 billion deficit now looks to be closer to $73 billion, with revenues continuing to lag behind their initial estimates. I previously reported on how this has impacted the funding of recycled water infrastructure, and it's something the water industry is definitely pushing back against before the budget gets finalized in June. And staff continues to work with our lobbyists and our water associations to track and analyze the budget as well as proposed legislation with potential impacts on our organization and our communities. More information is available in the NPA monthly report on priority bills, as well as the attached bill report, which begins on page 17 and which covers a more comprehensive set of proposed legislative measures. Staff is considering a number of potential bills for position recommendations, which could go to this committee next month. Some of the areas under consideration include changes to the water use objective timeline and implementation process, Prop 218 and other funding related bills, and emergency water supplies. We'll also continue to advocate for the bills that the board took support positions on last year, which includes the climate bond and SB 366, which relates to water supply targets. Switching gears, in another move that has really, I think, resonated around the water industry over the past week, the State Water Resources Control Board released updated draft conservation regulations on March 12th, last week. The updated proposal delays implementation and enforcement of the regulations, provides water providers with an additional 5 years to meet their water use targets, and is overall seen as a step in the right direction for the water industry, which had stated the previous version would be incredibly difficult and costly to implement, especially for our lower income communities. A public workshop will be held on this week on March 20th, with public feedback and comments being accepted for another week or so following the workshop. Final adoption of the regulations is expected in July, with the new regs going into effect at the beginning of 2025. Our staff is closely involved in reviewing and analyzing the updated draft, and we're working with Aqua, Water Reuse, Metropolitan, and others to express support for the new regulations. At this time, the changes seem to be very positive for our retailers, which will all have reduced conservation targets in 2030, 2035, and 2040. And then finally, Governor Newsom was scheduled to give his State of the State address today. However, the uncertainty over the fate of Proposition 1 caused him to postpone the speech to a later date. That concludes my state legislative affairs report. Please let me know if you have any questions before I move on to the federal report.
Thank you, Matt. Are there any questions? No, I don't hear any questions, Matt. Please move on. Thank you.
Okay, I will go on. So I'm now on page 33 of the agenda packet. And staff is working with Van Scoyoc Associates to prepare for the district's spring 2024 advocacy trip to Washington, D.C. Over the next couple of weeks, VSA will be scheduling meetings with all of the district's delegation offices, including 2 of which will be receiving Legislative of the Year awards, as well as a third office, Representative Grace Napolitano, who will also be receiving one of the awards. We'll also be scheduling meetings with the Bureau of Reclamation, the Army Corps of Engineers, FEMA, as well as Aqua DC staff and Metropolitan Water District DC staff. It is my goal to give directors a preliminary agenda with times and dates and offices that we'll be meeting with by the board meeting on March 27th. So there should be something next week for everyone to look at. It should be a busy and productive trip for whoever is able to make it and join us on those visits. In other updates, Congress finally passed its first FY 2024 appropriations measure, with the Senate voting on March 8th to pass a 6-bill funding package following a similar House action on March 6th. This measure included funding for the Bureau of Reclamation, the Army Corps, and the Environmental Protection Agency. The move is a small victory for Congress, as a second and larger set of bills is still in need of passage. Congress has until March 22nd, so at the end of this week, to finalize their negotiations and get something through. Otherwise, the government will either need to pass a continuing resolution or it could potentially suffer a partial government shutdown. Another good bit of news is that Senator Padilla introduced his low-income household water assistance program legislation on February 28th, which would establish a long-term water assistance program to help low-income residents throughout the nation. This is the legislation that the West Basin Board of Directors supported in January, making the district one of the officially registered supporters of the bill. The temporary funding for this program that was put into place following the pandemic is supposed to sunset at the end of this month, and we don't know yet if they'll extend it. Right now, it does not look like it will be. There has been some effort by the president's administration to try and divert funding from the low-income energy assistance program to the water assistance program to keep it going in the interim. However, it appears that Congress did not accept that recommendation as part of the fiscal year 24 appropriations package. It could be difficult to get some traction on the legislation this year, but as a consistent presence and advocate for the measure, Senator Padilla will surely make a strong attempt to push it through. On this topic, staff has reached out to those cities in our service area, those cities that had not previously enrolled in the temporary water assistance program. And I just want to report back that staff was able to encourage the city of Lomita to submit an application to opt into the program a couple of weeks ago. So they have submitted that application. I don't know yet what they've heard back or if they've heard back. And then in addition, we've had several conversations with the city of Inglewood to encourage their application before the funding officially closes. So we've gone back and forth with Inglewood city staff. I'm hoping that they'll get an application in. I do know that they had some concerns with kind of the process of opting in. But kind of at this point, it is in their hands to make the decision of whether or not they actually want to put in the application. But we have certainly done our part in encouraging them to do so. Before I go on, is there any questions about that? I know that's a topic of importance for you, Chairwoman Gray. Okay. If not, then I'll finish up my report. Oh, yes. Did you have
No,
something,
I'm
Chairwoman
sorry.
Gray?
No questions, no.
Okay,
Anyone
thank
else?
you. Okay, I'll go ahead and finish my report. So
Thank you.
on Wednesday of this week, the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee will hold a hearing on the impacts of designating PFAS as hazardous substances under the Superfund Act. Senator Padilla sits on this committee and has been engaged on the issue for a while now. West Basin previously sent a letter to Senator Padilla and Senator Feinstein last year asking for recycled water facilities to be held harmless from any downstream costs of PFAS remediation. An updated letter will hopefully be sent out to the committee today or tomorrow with copies to our senators reiterating our position on this matter. And then staff will continue to look for opportunities to advocate that polluters pay principles be used when assigning responsibility for PFAS cleanup and liability. On the topic of drought, the House recently passed the Drought Preparedness Act, which would extend funding for drought contingency planning, resiliency projects, and emergency response actions, which are all important areas for the Western United States. This is a bill that will now go to the Senate for further consideration. And then just to wrap up my report, I'll talk a little bit about the Colorado River. And I know that Tammy will provide some more details on this topic with kind of Metropolitan's tracking of it. But on March 6th, each of the upper and lower basins submitted competing plans to address future shortages on the river. Kind of the gist of these proposals is that the upper basin plan would place all of the mandatory cuts on the lower basin states of California, Arizona, and Nevada, while the lower basin plan recommends that all 7 states should share any needed cuts. They still have time to work out a unified plan, but the Department of the Interior is closely watching the situation and will step in and it's needed if progress isn't being made. And with that said, that concludes my report. Please let me know if you have any questions.
Man, I'm sorry, can you repeat that again? I couldn't really hear you. What's the plan again?
So, okay. So the upper basin plan, so this would be the states of Utah, Colorado, the upper basin states. They have proposed that all of the mandatory cuts would be placed onto the lower basin states, California, Arizona, and Nevada. While the lower basin plan, which was proposed by California, Arizona, and Nevada, would be that all 7 Colorado basin states would share the cuts. So the upper basin would place it all on us. Yeah. And that does conclude my my report, Chairwoman Gray.
All right, are there any questions, please?
If not,
Okay, thank you. Oh, go on. Director Deere,
no, thank you.
Director Williams, anyone?
No, thank you. No, thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Matt, those are very thorough reports. Thank you so much. Thank you again. We'll go on to item 6B, please.
Yes, Madam Chair. Item 6B is our monthly Metropolitan Water District update. And for this presentation, we have Tammy Hurley-High, our Water Policy and Resources Analyst 2.
Afternoon, Chair Gray, Member Deere, and Director Williams. So, yeah, as DJ mentioned, I'm going to provide an update on key items that Metropolitan has been discussing. Part of that, of course, as Matt had just mentioned, was the recent activity for the Colorado River and the operation. This report begins on page 40 of the committee packet. And then there's also additional PowerPoint slides that help guide the discussion. They begin on page 59 in the packet. So with respect to the final supplemental environmental impact statement, earlier this month, as Matt had mentioned, the Bureau of Reclamation released the final supplemental environmental impact statement. And this is for the near-term Colorado River operation that will start 2024 through 2026. So as a reminder, the purpose of this final supplemental environmental impact statement was to identify alternatives and to analyze impacts that are associated with updating the current interim guidelines. So the final SEIS included a proposal that was submitted back in May of last year, 2023, and that proposed to conserve 3 million acre feet through 2026. And so for the lower basin, most of this 3 million acre feet of proposed conservation would be funded through federal funds from the Inflation Reduction Act. The record of decision is anticipated to happen within the coming weeks. And then on the other part regarding the post 2026 operating guidelines, the Colorado River Basin states have continued to work to develop an alternative that would be submitted to reclamation as part of the environmental impact statement for the post 2026 operational guidelines. So there are differences in each of the two approaches of the lower basin and upper basin. And I can briefly summarize a few elements in comparison from the lower basin proposal and the upper basin. Similar what Matt had said as well. So the upper basin's alternative, it emphasizes refilling storage in Lake Powell, whereas the lower basin's alternative would operate reservoirs based on system content rather than focusing on the elevation at Lake Powell. And the lower basin addresses the structural deficit. The upper basin proposed including a low basin reduction to address the deficit. The lower basin proposes to operate the reservoirs based on total system content rather than operating decisions based on elevations at Lake Powell and Mead. And the upper basin would propose to operate Lake Powell and Mead separately. The lower basin proposal shares water use reduction broadly, where the upper basin would assume water reduction should only be in the lower basin. And then there's a few other specifics, but basically they were different alternatives and different approaches that they had presented to reclamation for their consideration. But the states will continue to work together to finalize details and working with hopefully coming up with a consensus in the coming months. So the post 2026 draft environmental impact statement is anticipated to be released towards the end of 2024 by December. And then the final environmental impact statement is expected to be available in 2025. So the next step is reclamation will model and analyze the alternative with several different possible future water supply conditions that would include much drier conditions than what we have experienced in recent years. So that wraps up that item. And then if we can move to the next slide, please. Regarding the climate adaptation master plan for water. So Metropolitan is still very much involved in putting this together, and the climate adaptation master plan for water, they had a task force and they continue to convene each month. They're now discussing time-bound targets, and the time-bound targets would be important for tracking progress on policy goals in the future across many different categories. The Camp for Water Task Force recently discussed targets focused on multiple categories of climate adaptation efforts that include core supply, conservation, infrastructure, storage, water quality, equity, and affordability. So in a couple of months from now, in May, Metropolitan is planning to have a draft one-year report, and that is supposed to be completed. A master plan will be presented to the board towards the end of this calendar year. And that would incorporate all of the planning efforts that they've been working on with the climate adaptation master plan. The next slide, please. So Metropolitan recently adjusted a few of the committee structures. And so we have listed here what the recent changes have been. Earlier in January, the executive committee proposed amendment to the administrative code, and then as an information item, and then in February, the board did adopt the structures and the changes to that. So you see here listed those changes. And one would be eliminate the subcommittee on audit and the ad hoc committee on the implementation of the state audit and transfer their responsibility to a new audit subcommittee of the executive committee. The second is to rename the Finance, Audit, Insurance, and Real Property Committee as a Finance and Asset Management Committee now. So this will now delete the audit-related duties from the Finance Committee, and those duties would be transferred to new audit subcommittee of the Executive Committee. The third item was to increase the number of non-officer members from 3 to 4 that will serve on the Executive Committee. And then lastly, renaming of the Legislation, Regulatory Affairs, and Communication Committee. And this will now be named as the Legislation and Communication Committee. This change now deletes the regulatory matters from the duties of the Legislation Committee, because the regulatory matter will now be addressed by the appropriate committee based on the substance of whatever the particular item is. Okay, and next slide, please.
I have a question.
Yes,
What motivated all these reforms?
I'm sorry.
What motivated all these reforms?
What movie? Someone said before?
The renaming and so forth. Well,
You know, this is the prerogative of the chairman of the Metropolitan Water District. He did mention these changes as part of one of the caucus meetings that West Basin participates in. It's the West.
Central West Gateway.
Correct. And when he listed the changes, he did so under the premise that somewhat of a lessons learned. Some of them were changes that he had made after becoming chair, and he was simply changing it back. And that would be the best example of that would be adding regulatory to the Legislative and Communications Committee. That's a very technical component to the committee. And in doing so, if you're talking about communications and legislation, sometimes you can really get bogged down by the regulatory aspect of it. But he also mentioned the auditing function as well, was just, he originally had some ideas, and having implemented those for a year, he felt like there were possibly mistakes. And so he was changing back. So.
thank you.
So next, regarding the proposed biennial budget and rate. This process has started in February, and on February 13th, the workshop number 1 was presented to the Metropolitan Board. On February 27th, the workshop number 3 was held on, workshop number 2 was held on Tuesday, February 27th, and workshop number 3 was held on Tuesday, March 12th, last week. Shown here in this slide is the initial proposed increase for calendar year 25 and 26. The proposed increase would be 13% and 8% respectively, which is a total of 21% over 2 years. So Metropolitan has reduced the current budget and has been effective in controlling costs. Their staff has reported significant rising inflation costs, as we've all heard. So there's a lot of impacts, reduced water sales, inflation costs. And Metropolitan has been drawing on their financial reserve, keep rate increases as low as possible. However, the lack of revenue from water sales due to both drought conditions and recent record precipitation, this is preventing Metropolitan from relying on their reserves that are otherwise used to buffer revenue losses. So an increase in revenues is needed to maintain the minimum levels of reserve funding that are necessary for emergencies, as well as to maintain the debt capacity. At their last workshop, number 3, Metropolitan staff presented additional alternatives for the board to weigh in and discuss. And the additional alternatives were presented in response to a variety of requests from the board members. Also included in this report is an attachment. It has a few of the additional alternatives that were in the last presentation. If we could maybe go to that one page, page 66 of the committee packet. we'll look at the bottom slide. So this bottom slide, this is a summary of the 4 alternatives that are related to a proposed increase in the assessed valuation by property tax increases. So the initial proposed budget and the first alternative is based on 1.44 million acre feet of demand by doubling the assessed value of property tax without putting conservation program on hold for 2 years. Alternative 2 through 4, these alternatives are based on lower water sales based on 1.3 million acre feet of water a year. And if we can go to the next page, please. Thank you. So this shows the initial budgeted water sales based on selling 1.44 million acre feet of water each year. And then the yellow line is showing the lower water sales at 1.34 million acre feet a year. This is by comparison. So there's several other slides that show details related to these different alternatives. If I could ask if we could advance to page 73, please. Thank you. So page 73 of the committee packet that we see here. The first slide shows what the rate increases would be based on which alternative would be approved. And these rates are separated between untreated and treated water deliveries. And then the slide on the bottom of the page shows what, we can go down to the bottom. Yeah, so this shows what the estimated impact would be if Metropolitan were to increase the property tax rate. So they're giving examples for all of the member agencies as far as what the median home value is, what it would look like, what the current assessed valuation is, and then what it would look like, for example, if they were to double that property tax. So for example, for West Basin, we currently range between $22 and $70. And if the property tax rate would be double, this would be estimated between $43 to $140. So more to come. The board has been very engaged in these discussions in this item. And but so far, we just don't know what kind of the alternative would be favored. So more discussions to come. There is general consensus basically about the conservation program. The board has received a lot of feedback that to request not putting a pause on the conservation program. They want to look at other ways that they can do to keep this going without any type of taking a pause on the program. So there should be another workshop on Tuesday, March 26th. And then on April 8th, information will be presented on the recommended biannual budget and rates. And then the board will consider the proposed budget and rates for adoption on April 9th, 2024. And then also for the West Basin Caucus meeting, we would like to reach out to Catano and her budget team to invite them back again and provide an update on the information that they had shared before with us. So that date would be Wednesday, April 3rd. With all of the additional alternatives being presented to the Metropolitan Board, it might be important for the West Basin Board and our retail agencies to see the most up-to-date options that are being considered. So before I move on to other items, are there any questions?
Yes, Tammy, thank you. Before I ask my questions, are there any questions of the other board members?
Well, thank you.
Okay.
No, thank you.
Okay. Back to the restructuring of the committees, subcommittees, or whatever they're called now. I heard you say, I believe, the regulatory responsibility would be taken away from the auditor and given to a committee, as well as the legislation. EJ or someone, can you explain what that means?
Yes.
The
So
question is, does it affect the ability of the auditor to conduct audits independently and so forth?
yes. So let's see here. So eliminate the subcommittee on audits and the ad hoc committee on implementation of state audit. So those duties, those would be transferred to a brand new audit subcommittee, which would be part of the executive committee.
Okay, Tammy,
Yeah.
say that slowly, what you just said. What would it do?
Yeah, so they would basically, they have a new audit subcommittee, which is reporting to the executive committee. So what they've done is they've eliminated the subcommittee on audit and the ad hoc committee. So now they have transferred those responsibilities to a brand new audit subcommittee that will report to the executive committee.
So it's not taking any function away from our general auditor, is that correct?
Correct, no. Yeah, they're just shifting and renaming and just, reorganizing, I guess, the duties that, would be a better fit, as EJ had mentioned earlier.
Yeah, and I think I heard you say something about Katana coming to present on, I guess,
The finance?
water conservation. Yes, but I
Yes.
would also suggest that she somehow focus, and maybe she's already done this, focus on the option of supporting doubling the ad valorem tax versus increasing the proposed fees on water. What is being proposed now? To show that comparison, what that really means.
The comparison on, the property tax, I'm sorry.
Yes, yeah, the property ad valorem tax.
Right,
What's
so
the
there
pros-
were,
what's the pros and cons of each of those options?
right, so there are, did you want me to go into more detail about all those options?
Pardon me? I know there's a proposed rate increase, and I forget, I think it's 23%, I don't know, but how that compares to increasing ad valorem tax, the property tax.
Oh, right, okay, so on that initial proposed budget, it would increase 13% the first year and 8% the next year. And so if the board would consider adopting and raising the property tax, that would greatly reduce the rate increase. Okay, so the rate increase you would look at, depending on what level of increasing the property tax or doubling the property tax. The rate increase, you could look at 5% the first year and 5% the second year. So it could
Yeah,
be
and
drastically reduced.
Yeah, and Tammy, thank you for saying that, but I think a presentation from Katana on what I just said would be helpful to the full board, is what I'm saying to you.
Oh, okay, okay,
Yeah, but I thank you for your comments, so.
okay, thank you. Yeah, I wanted to make sure I understood your question. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Tammy, I appreciate that.
Thank you. Okay, so, if we could, I guess, move on, if we could go back to page 63 of the presentation slides, it's for the board agenda look ahead. And so these items were heard at the committee and board meeting, and it took place last week. Of interest, there were 2 action items which were approved. However, I just wanted to mention item 7-6. There was a lot of discussion centered on specifics. This was related to the Pure Water Program and to authorize an increase to the agreement that they currently have with Helix Environmental. So this item was approved, but what this work would do is to include the additional environmental analysis of connecting to LADWP's Operation Next project and expansion of the pure water pipeline in a certain particular area from 7 foot to 9 foot in diameter. There was some concern by some of the members regarding the cost of this additional work, especially in light of the fact that Metropolitan, the board has not formally approved the Pure Water project. Metropolitan staff has reported, as we've heard before, they have received $80 million, a grant from the state, and they've also submitted another application seeking federal funding. And Metropolitan staff has also reported the need to do the environmental steps first. The board would then need to consider certification of that environmental impact report, and then the board would consider an action item to include the Pure Water project in the CIP budget. Other items included a presentation on a regional survey that was conducted on water conservation, which provided some very good data and feedback from consumers. At the One Water Stewardship Committee, staff provided information to the board seeking feedback and input on a proposed interagency local supply exchange program. Metropolitan staff is going to use that information to shape the proposed program, and they will bring it back to the board at a later date. And then lastly, of interest, of course, with the budget and rates for site construction. And then that concludes the update on the Metropolitan items. I can move on and provide a brief update on the water supply conditions if you're interested.
Okay, any questions, please?
No, thank
Any
you.
questions?
No,
I thank you,
No,
Tammy.
thanks.
You can move on. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, so we can go to the graph that is yeah, thank you very much. So on the right side of the page for the State Water project,
what page number?
that is on page, thank you. Let me look it up. 64. 64. Thank you. So we're looking at the State Water project as of February 26th. The California Northern Sierra snowpack measured at 93% of the precipitation. 93%, and then the precipitation measured at 92%. Lake Oroville reservoir is at 84% of its total capacity. And then on the right blue shaded area for the Upper Colorado River Basin, both the precipitation and snowpack are measuring 98% and 99%. So the precipitation conditions in February have been above average throughout most of the Colorado River Basin. And then just looking at the second page for the State Water project area in that green shaded area on the second page, they so DWR had conducted the third manual snow survey, which reported 47.5 inches of snow depth and snow water equivalent of 18 inches. This represents 80% of average for the date and is an improvement compared to the first readings in January. And those readings were 7.5 inches of snow depth and a snow water equivalent of 3 inches. So good improvement there. Now the box next to that for the 8-station precipitation index, it shows a little bit more than 32 inches of precipitation to date, with conditions being 93% of normal. And then the box just below that shows Lake Oroville storage. And currently that storage is 2.9 million acre feet. It's about 84% of total capacity and 130% of its historical average. For the Colorado River Basin, the Upper Colorado precipitation graphic shows 13.3 inches and is at 98% of normal. The Colorado River snowpack graphic shows 12 inches and is 99% of normal. So below for Lake Powell and Lake Mead, those graphics on the storage levels, you can see much improvement compared to water levels last year. Currently, Lake Mead's elevation is 1,076 feet. Last year, in February 2023, Lake Mead's elevation was 1,047 feet. So that is a 30-foot increase compared to last year. So of course, the wet winter helped, but there's also been a significant amount of conservation efforts, particularly here in California and for Metropolitan, that has helped Lake Mead elevation to increase. Metropolitan staff has reported that last year, the water use from Colorado River supply was 700,000 feet under the allocated amount. So that's just additional water that's kept in Lake. So in summary, recent storms have boosted the state's snowpack and outlook after a relatively dry start to the season. And these storms have brought much needed precipitation and snowpack to the upper Colorado River Basin, northern Sierras, and to Southern California. And that concludes my update. I'll be happy to answer any other questions that you may have.
Thank you so much, Tammy. Any questions? Sounds like no questions, Tammy. You did a great job,
Okay.
very thorough report. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you again. All right, the next item is, do we have any closed session?
Madam Chair, we do not.
All right, next item, director's comments. Director Deere,
No comments, thank you.
Director Williams,
No, thank you, but I would like to have a copy of the hard copy of the report. Thank you.
okay, any future agenda items?
You did so. There you go. I saved it for you.
No
You're just
future
a
agenda
mess,
items.
though.
No, it's in order.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, my comments, thank you to staff, general manager, and all the staff for their excellent reports this morning. Matt and Tammy, I think, were the ones reporting. So thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. General Manager. And with that, this meeting is adjourned. And thank you, directors, for being there. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you.